Halito, bonjour, buenos dias, good morning. My name is Monique Verdun, and it is an honor for me to welcome you to Bulbuncha, the unceded territories of the Homa, the Shitamacha, the Choctaw, the Biloxi, the Atakapa Ishak, the Akola Pisa, the Chapatulis, the Bayugula, the Appaloosa, the Tunica, and all the names of the nations that have been forgotten or erased. In Muskogee, Bulbuncha means place of many tongues or place of many languages. When the colonizers sailed in to claim and rename this sacred site, New Orleans, I found it funny last year as the city was celebrating its 300-year colonial founding that we really should have been celebrating Bulbuncha 3000, as this has been a place where many different people have been coming for many, many, many years. And as I look out among this huge crowd of people today, I can't help but think that this place is still living up to its name, as you are all coming from so many different places, speaking your own languages and bringing knowledge to share, as this place has so much to teach and so much to learn. Pre-colonization, up to 7 different languages were spoken here in the territory. As you can see from this map, this is a PowerPoint for the planet. There are over 4,000 active leases in the Gulf of Mexico. The area between the Gulf and the mouth of the Mississippi and the Baton Rouge, our state capital, which once marked the hunting territories of the Homa, which lived north. My people have been pushed to the edges of the earth, to the bottoms of the bayous, where we have been living as fishermen for quite some time, surviving off of the bounty of this place, a womb for the world, a major delta where water comes to be purified and the estuaries give life to the generations to come. And yet we are witnessing the side effects of a legacy of extraction that goes back to the colonizers coming in and cutting down the 1,000-year-old cypress trees that we should be surrounded by. And I just want to acknowledge my ancestors and your ancestors who have all brought us to this space at this time along this amazing Mississippi River, which I think is right behind me, but I feel really disoriented in this space. But it is very high, and I encourage you to spend time with this amazing waterway that's bringing over 41% of the watershed of the continental US out into the Gulf of Mexico. It has built this land that we stand upon that is full of magic and history and knowledge. And I challenge you as you spend your time here with each other and on these sacred grounds, that you try to use your imagination to remember what it once was, and also to put your dreams and your hopes, and if you are one who prays, to put your prayers into believing what it can be again, as it is vital not only for me and my people and my home, but for all of us. Thank you.
Please welcome the New Orleans local host co-chairs, Susan M. Taylor, the Montine McDaniel Freeman Director, New Orleans Museum of Art, and Stephen J. Watson, President and CEO, the National World War II Museum.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to New Orleans AAM. We are so delighted to have you here. To have you here for the world's largest gathering of museum professionals, for what we know will be a truly unique, educational, and we hope memorable experience. New Orleans is the perfect place to explore this year's AAM meeting theme: dynamic, Absolutely. Relevant? No question. Essential? I would say critical. Sustaining vibrant museums, our collective goal in New Orleans. Our 300-year-old city, this year 301, is filled with remarkable examples of how to adapt to change while preserving the cultures and authenticity that defines us as a city. 300 years of history, many histories in fact, make for many narratives, a wealth of interpretive opportunities that define each cultural organization's commitment to education, engagement, and outreach. And we do our very best to make sure that we are accessible to all. I hope you'll spend some time exploring New Orleans, especially our community of museums and historic homes that tell many of our stories. They celebrate the past, use the present as a lens with which to look back, and of course, to serve as a catalyst for the future. The result? A series of unforgettable experiences that I know will leave a lasting impression on our visitors. When you're in the expo hall, please visit what we've called the New Orleans Lagniappe. For those of you unfamiliar with the word, lagniappe is defined as something given as a bonus or a gift. Our gift to you is a continuing roster of Louisiana cooking and cocktail demonstrations. Of course, the New Orleans Sazerac, so if you haven't tasted it already, you really must try. Music and so much more. This year, the AAM bookstore will also feature a selection of books related to the history, culture, and art of New Orleans, as well as local museum publications. We hope that by the end of the conference, your interest in New Orleans will be piqued enough that you will want to continue exploring the city through literature and perhaps another visit to our city in the future. All of us on the host committee are delighted to welcome you, and now and any time in the future. I hope this AAM conference meets and, yes, frankly, exceeds your expectations, and I look forward to welcoming many of you this evening to the New Orleans Museum of Art for the opening party tonight, hosted in conjunction with the New Orleans Botanical Garden and Louisiana Children's Museum. Thank you all for being here.
And good morning, and thank you, Susan. And likewise, I look forward to hosting many of you tomorrow night at our closing party at the National World War II Museum, the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, and the Contemporary Arts Center. It is an understatement to say we are so glad that AAM is back in New Orleans after a 15-year hiatus. It's been far too long. And I think you know, since the conference was last here in 2004, the city of New Orleans has had, frankly, more than its fair share of challenges. But I think in spite of that adversity, the local museum community has really punched above its weight to help bring New Orleans back stronger than ever. I want to take a moment to thank our fantastic local host committee seated to my left, who, as Susan said, are really proud to bring you elements of New Orleans culture directly through this conference. Would all members of our local host committee please stand and be recognized? Give them a round of applause for their hard work. It's their hard work that has produced really one of the largest AAM annual meetings in recent years, and of course, what we think will be the best yet. I'd also like to recognize Denise Malo and the team at BBC Destination Management for coordinating all aspects of local hospitality and events for this year's conference. It's their behind-the-scenes dedicated work that has made a big impact, and you are the beneficiaries of that. So thank you, Denise and BBC, especially as the co-chairs. You have made our jobs significantly easier. We have also received incredible support from our generous sponsors. I want to specifically recognize our top sponsors who supported the work of the local host committee efforts, and those include Susan and her team at the New Orleans Museum of Art, our partners at Centerplate, the Solomon Group, the Audubon Nature Institute, New Orleans Tourism and Marketing Corporation, Vorsanger Architects, Gallagher and Associates, the Hellas Foundation, the Hedema Group, the Historic New Orleans Collection, Louisiana Children's Museum, Lee Ledbetter and Associates, and Escu, Dumez and Ripple. Let's give them a round of applause for their support. And of course, thanks to all of you for being here and all of the other sponsors that it takes to make this such a great success. So we would now like to welcome to the stage AAM President and CEO Laura Lott. To help lead us into this year's meeting, we are pleased to present you, Laura, with your very own custom-made second line umbrella. So we suggest that you keep this handy. You never know when you might be able to put it to good use. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Susan and Stephen, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2019 AAM annual meeting, the largest annual gathering of museum professionals in the world. This is always one of my favorite weeks of the year. Not only do I get to see friends and colleagues from around the world, but I love to see and experience the true power of our alliance. We have a lot of first-timers here this year. Where are you, first-timers? Yeah, wow, welcome. And we have veteran museum goers here who have been attending for a decade or more, some 40 years and more. Go ahead, also give a wave. We know you started coming as children, right? And you are all part of our alliance, now nearly 40,000 strong. Give yourselves all a round of applause. As our AAM veterans know, our meetings always have a theme or a focus area as we continue to apply our collective wisdom and power to address areas of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in museums, and the deliberate integration of our museums into societal structures such as the pre-K through 12 education system. This year, we also turn our attention to the financial sustainability of museums, exploring the theme, dynamic, relevant, essential, sustaining vibrant museums. New Orleans is a perfect venue for exploring the financial sustainability and viability of museums. It's nearly impossible to find a better example of resilience and a vibrant culture amidst change and challenge than this city. The people of New Orleans have persevered through natural disasters, economic downturns, and societal changes like so many cities in the US. And New Orleans has done all of this while preserving its historic culture, its unique charm, and vibrant character. What an inspiration for museums. Now, too often, when I say that changing business models for financial sustainability is one of the Alliance's 3 focus areas, museum professionals nod politely and try to hide the glazed over look in their eyes. Too often, in my experience, there's a perceived division between those professionals who design the programs and curate the exhibits and those who are responsible for maintaining the financial health of our museums. Sometimes our passion for the amazing work of museums can blind us to the business realities within our organizations and the disruptions and financial pressures coming from outside. I fear that many of us are dangerously close to making a fatal mistake of assuming that funding will come somehow, somewhere, just because we deserve it. Please take 2 things from my remarks this morning. First, museums will be much better positioned to inform, inspire, and enrich our world if they have healthy balance sheets. And second, long-term financial sustainability is everyone's responsibility. and it's something we must talk about openly and honestly. Data from our recent Museum Board Leadership Report suggests nearly 1/3 of museums dip into their financial reserves, their savings or rainy day funds, or endowment funds to cover basic operating expenses. What's frightening is that this reserve spending is occurring in a pretty strong economy. And even more frightening, many predict we're on the doorstep of another recession, for which far too many of us are not adequately prepared. As budgets tighten, museums defer basic necessities like facility maintenance, putting their people and collections at risk. On the screen is a heartbreaking photo of the devastating fire at the National Museum of Brazil last year. Like many nonprofits, museums often stretch and ultimately burn out staff, resources, and risk losing great talent to higher paying industries. On the revenue side of the equation, museums are competing against a growing number of nonprofits for crucial funding. Philanthropic giving is increasingly focused on solving specific societal problems and demanding quick and measurable outcomes. In many parts of the country, government funding is shrinking, even as public officials seek more tax payments from nonprofits. And museums of all sizes are competing for the attention of visitors and their spending. As the pace of change quickens, our field needs to improve our financial discipline, business planning, and data literacy. This is not an option, it is a necessity. Museums must innovate, experiment, and implement new business models in order to secure our financial futures. Now, many of you have heard me admit that I'm a recovering certified public accountant. And I have a secret love of numbers. But the issue of financial sustainability is not just for the accountants. It needs the collective genius of all of you, of our entire field. As the saying goes, no money, no mission. This week, as we learn from each other, and in the days and months ahead, I challenge you and your museums to renew your focus in a few areas of financial sustainability. 1, design new mission-related income streams around the core businesses and talents of your museum. 2, explore shared service models to optimize some key functions of your institution in order to contain costs and to improve capacity. 3, be proactive in demonstrating to donors and funders that museums provide essential and often measurable social, economic, educational, and community good. And 4, let's become truly inclusive in all aspects of our operations, leadership, and engagement with our increasingly diverse communities. We literally cannot afford to leave anyone out. I want to hear your ideas, what's working, what's not, and how the Alliance can help. Another area in which AAM is taking a leadership role is in exploring issues of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of museum structure and programming. Now, I believe there are lots of cases to be made for museums to prioritize what we abbreviate DEAI. But if you or your board is looking for the business case, here it is. Research shows the makeup of museums' core audience is stuck in the 1970s. Data shows that visitors of color make up 11% of museum audiences on average, but 39% of the US population. Museums are going to find it increasingly difficult to survive if we're only serving half the population, both because in business terms it means declining market share, and because most museums as nonprofit or governmental or quasi-governmental organizations, we have a legal obligation to serve the public, the whole public, not just a segment. Our field's lack of diversity, if it persists, calls into question how well we're actually serving the public and puts public funding and tax advantages at even greater risk. To quote New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio in his plan to require the city's cultural institutions to demonstrate diversity, it's important to ensure if we're investing public money that these organizations represent everyone and include everyone. And this isn't just a coastal or big city issue. Our colleagues at Conner Prairie in Indiana just released the results of a public opinion poll on the role of history and museums as education, community, and entertainment institutions. They learned that 79% of Americans think it's important that museums demonstrate a sustained commitment for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And 92% of Americans think it is important that museums are fully accessible to all guests. Museums' viability and financial sustainability depends largely on their ability to be relevant, magnetic, and inclusive, reflecting our communities. If you visit a museum and don't see anyone who looks like you, and the board's strategic decisions don't reflect your cultural identity, and the collection and interpretation doesn't include you and your history, you're probably not going back. Make no mistake, DEAI work is about museum excellence, and it's a moral, political, and business imperative. The best part of being in an alliance is knowing you are not alone. There's a lot of help out there. AAM is raising up museum successes here at the annual meeting this week and year-round. A quick glance at our website will reveal the many aspects of DEAI we are addressing, with your help and that of our LGBTQ Alliance, the Latino Network, DivCom, and other partners such as the Gender Equity in Museums movement. Many of you saw the national news coverage of our new initiative around board diversity and inclusion, but I want to share some details of this unprecedented initiative today. First, let me acknowledge that I am as impatient as anyone for urgent change, and there is a strong temptation to just dive into action and try to fix past wrongs. However, for real and lasting impact, the first step is understanding. So, at AAM, we began by talking to many of you to understand your concerns and challenges and bright spots, what seemed to be working. On the heels of the museum staff demographic survey by the Mellon Foundation in partnership with AAM and AAMD, Dr. Janetta Cole and I led a field-wide DEAI working group. Together, we asked a lot of questions and explored why there has been such insufficient change in the demographic makeup of our staffs, visitors, and boards, despite ongoing work for more than 20 years. The working group's Facing Change report identified 5 key insights, including that we must do personal work to face our own unconscious biases, and that we need to move from transactional steps to systemic change, and that inclusive leadership is essential at all levels of an organization. Our museum board leadership report gave us insight into a previously unaddressed area of DEAI work, museum boards. The survey revealed that nearly half of museum boards are entirely white. 3/4 of museum directors, however, believe diversifying their boards racially and ethnically is important, but far fewer have developed plans of action to become more inclusive, provided inclusion training to their boards and staffs, or implemented other changes to the status quo. To begin to fill this gap and address museums' needs and desires to better reflect the communities they serve, we are launching the unprecedented national initiative called Facing Change, Advancing Museum Board Diversity and Inclusion. Backed by a record gift for AAM, a $4 million grant from the Mellon, Alice L. Walton, and Ford Foundations, this 3-year initiative will provide the framework, training, and resources for museum leaders to build inclusive cultures within their institutions that more accurately reflect the communities they serve. To make real and lasting change, work needs to be done at the top, where the tone and priorities for each museum are established. AAM aims to drive long-lasting systemic culture change through this initiative, and this board and director-level work complements the hard work and investments already being made to diversify museums' talent pools, programming, and collections. The first phase of the project includes intensive training and resources for 50 museum boards in 5 communities, aimed at developing sustainable inclusion plans tailored to the needs of each museum and its unique community. A museum trustee resource center just launched. This section of our website will reach many more museums and communities across the country with resources for truly inclusive museum governance. A board matching program will connect individuals interested in serving on museum boards with museums seeking new perspectives and talents. And lastly, at this meeting, we're convening a task force to look at how DEAI gets more embedded into our excellence programs, from the Code of Ethics to MAP to accreditation. This is an incredible group of museum leaders from all types and sizes of museums across the country. Their photos are on the slide, and you can also find them on our website. It's led by two leaders whom I truly admire, Lonnie Bunch and Elizabeth Pierce. Underlying this initiative is a team of stellar professionals from AAM's growing staff DEAI team and 10 senior fellows selected from a highly competitive pool of over 140 applicants. I hope you will join our listening session later this afternoon to meet many of these folks, or stop by the AAM Resource Center in Museum Expo to learn more about this initiative and provide your input. Or come chat with Sister Dr. Janetta Cole and me at our book signing on Wednesday. Thanks to incredible thought leaders and contributors, we have compiled a text of sorts of some of the most important essays around DEAI in museums over the last 20 years, because we need to continue learning from the past as we chart our path forward. One of the best parts of my job at the Alliance is that virtually everyone I deal with loves museums. And a recent public opinion poll of thousands of Americans conducted by AAM and Wilkening Consulting confirmed that what we always knew were true facts. 97% of Americans believe that museums are educational assets for their communities, and 96% of the public wants Congress to fund museums. This poll revealed that supporting museums is a core value of the American public that crosses political lines, bridges divides between urban and rural communities, and is even consistent among those who do not regularly visit museums. And museums share another unique and favorable attribute. In this age of fake news and rampant distrust of traditional sources of information, museums are among the most trustworthy sources. Museums' trustworthiness is rated higher than local newspapers, nonprofit and academic researchers, and the government. Neither the public support nor its trust is guaranteed, however, and museums must fiercely protect both. We must also realize the weighty responsibility of having the public's trust. The information we choose to share, the stories we choose to tell or not tell, the individuals we involve in our museums as board members and funders, and how we handle our inevitable mistakes all stands to impact how trustworthy and worthy of public support the public considers museums. I hope you'll read AAM's newest Trends Watch report from the Center for the Future of Museums, which explores this weighty and really critical topic. And if you missed Trends Watch, the scenario edition, you are really missing out on a powerful museum planning tool to turn the trends we've been tackling into action and to apply a futurist framework to your strategic planning. In closing, I would be remiss if I didn't thank many people who are key to all of this work and a lot of other work happening across the Alliance. AAM's incredible board of directors and accreditation commission, our dedicated professional network leaders who provide invaluable networking and focused learning opportunities for everyone here at the annual meeting and at events across the country. Thank you to Susan Taylor and Stephen Watson and the entire local host committee for your warm New Orleans hospitality, and to the National Program Committee who put together this week's stellar program of sessions. I also have to thank the talented and dedicated AAM staff, almost all of whom are here this week wearing their staff badges and ready to help. And last, but certainly not least, thank you. There is no Alliance without you. Thank you. And now, please help me welcome the board chair of the American Alliance of Museums, Kippen de Albichu.
So, starting from last night, It was requested that I adopt a much more serious persona by Brooke Lee. She said, do not deviate from the script. Okay? And that may be from a reputation I gained through the Western Museums Association and speaking at their general sessions. I'm not sure. But anyway, speaking of WMA, is WMA in the house? Wow, what's with the tribalism and regionalism? We are a global village. You should be ashamed of yourselves. And I think Brooke slipped in an electronic buzzer in my suit this morning. I'm being shocked right now. Anyway, I will get back to the script. Oh, there was another one. I didn't know they made pockets there. Oh. Anyway, thank you, Laura. Seriously. It is an honor to be with all of you today and to serve the museum field as the board chair for the American Alliance, your alliance. It is now my privilege to recognize some individuals and institutions that exemplify the very best the museum field has to offer. The AAM Award for Distinguished Service to Museums recognizes an individual's significant and sustained contributions to the field over a career of 20+ years. This year, we are thrilled to present the award to Dr. Deborah Marrow, the former director of the Getty Foundation. Under her leadership, the Getty Foundation has awarded nearly 8,000 grants to projects in over 180 countries, benefiting art history, conservation, and museums. In 1992, in the wake of civil unrest in Los Angeles, Dr. Marrow founded a multicultural undergraduate internship program that has since introduced thousands of students from diverse backgrounds to careers in museums and visual arts organizations. Here to accept the Distinguished Service Award on Dr. Marrow's behalf is Katie Underwood of the Getty Foundation.
Morning, everyone. I am delighted to be here to accept this award on Deborah's behalf, and I have some remarks she wanted to share with all of you. I wish I could be here with you today because I am deeply honored to accept AAM's award for distinguished service to museums. The Getty Foundation is dedicated to supporting the understanding and preservation of the visual arts around the world. And as Kippen mentioned, since 1984, we have given nearly 8,000 grants for art history, conservation, and museums. Over the years, as all of you know, there have been many changes in the museum field, ranging from opportunities for new engagement in the digital era to achieving diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in museum staff, collections, and programs. During this time, Getty's support for museums has been steadfast, and it has included grants for museum, conservation, research, and interpretation. Also, the AAM Getty International Program, which brings museum professionals from around the world to this conference. The Online Scholarly Catalog Initiative, or OSCE as it came to be known, which helped museums unlock the potential of digital collection catalogs. And one of our longest running programs, our summer internship program, which since 1993 has funded 3,400 paid summer internships to college students from diverse backgrounds in museums and visual arts organizations around LA. And what Deborah didn't include in her remarks is that we renamed the program in her honor upon her retirement, the Getty Marrow Undergraduate Internship Program. There is also Pacific Standard Time, a region-wide collaboration of linked exhibitions and programs funded by foundation grants and presented together with museums across Southern California. and 2 new initiatives, the Paper Project and Conserving Canvas, and information about both of those is available on our website. Now, none of these programs would have been possible without the dedication and partnership of many people. I want to thank first all of you, the AAM members, for your commitment to museums. And I'd also, in particular, like to commend the leadership of Executive Director Laura Lott and her predecessor, Ford Bell, who I saw earlier down there, yes. Their intelligence and vision have taken AAM to new heights. I also want to thank the Getty Foundation staff for their thoughtful stewardship of our grant programs. Thank you again for this award. I'm so grateful.
Thank you again, Katie, and congratulations again to Dr. Deborah Marrow. And now I am pleased to present the Nancy Hanks Memorial Award for Professional Excellence, which honors a museum professional with less than 10 years' experience in the field. The award commemorates the late Nancy Hanks and her encouragement of young professionals in the cultural arena. This year's Nancy Hanks Award recipient is Wissam Mohammed. Wissam is the curator at the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities and PhD fellow at Aarhus University in Denmark. Wissam.
Thank you so much. I cannot be more proud. I'm honored and grateful for, or to be part of the AAM and to be here with you today and to receive this distinguished award of the Nancy Hanks. Actually, I'm thinking that when you are working with heritage and museums, you don't work for your own benefits, but you work for the world, for the history and the future of humanity. And to receive an award for this is something that beyond my imagination. But I also think that this award is not only mine. That when I look at my own CV, I see a lot of efforts done by other people. I see my family, my colleagues, and some faces of people who are here today among you also. This award is for everyone who helped me to be here today. It's for my colleagues in Egypt who are working very hard and making great efforts in the field of museums and archaeology. On behalf of all of them, thank you so much. And thanks for the AAM.
Congratulations again, Wissam. In September 2017, Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico and much of the Caribbean. In the wake of the storm, the leadership of Museo de Arte de Puerto Rico jumped into action to not only ensure its collection was safe, but to house and help conserve art and artifacts from other museums and cultural and religious institutions across the island. The museum opened to the community within a week, providing programming and some of the only electricity and air conditioning in the city for 2 months. The AAM Chair's Leadership Award is not presented annually. Rather, it is reserved for rare occasions of outstanding leadership and extraordinary work in the museum field. It is my distinct honor to present the Chair's Leadership Award to Museo de Arte de Puerto Rico for the museum staff's heroic efforts to preserve Puerto Rican history and culture. Please join me in welcoming Marta Mabel Perez to accept the award on the museum's behalf.
Boricua pa'lante. I am honored to receive this award. I want to thank Laura a lot for the initiative and the board to support her. The Museo de Arte de Puerto Rico is a family. Our staff is a family. And we are really proud to receive and honor this prize, this award today. Sorry. I am really nervous with this huge, big crowd that I have in front of me. When the hurricane hits on Thursday, the next Monday, I was in charge of sending the signal to all the community in the museum world, not only to the AAM, only to the AAMD and to the ICOM. It is so important, the alliances between museum professionals and museum organization. Without your support, we couldn't make it, and also with the support of the Puerto Rican diaspora. I am very proud of my staff because we have developed a perfect emergency plan. Due to that perfect plan that we had, we could help others in Puerto Rico. As soon as the hurricane hit us, I was more than pleased to receive the support from the Smithsonian Institution, also from the American Alliance of Museums, and the AAMD. Without they sending the message that we need help in Puerto Rico, we couldn't make it. When the hurricane hit, the staff came to me and they say, Marta, we're going to give water and food to the community. And I said, we're going to do more. We're going to help our colleagues that they do not have energy, they do not have power. And we support them and receive all the works that we need from that they need help from different institutions in Puerto Rico. But we not only did that, we also give support to all the museum professionals in Puerto Rico. Thanks to FEMA, we gave support to all the professionals, first to the director, to give them and to teach them how to do a perfect emergency plan. Later, to the registrar and to the conservators, how to prepare and how to deal with their collection when the powers came back, also to take care of their health. Finally, we did another conference to the general public so the Puerto Ricans knew how to take care of their personal belongings. So it was a long year that we were in charge of everything, and we took care of all our community professionals in Puerto Rico. We are really proud of what we have done. If something happened again, the Museum of Puerto Rico is going to be again the national deposit to save the patrimony of Puerto Rico. I know all the artworks in my island. I know all the artists in Puerto Rico. And that's why I took that decision as a director to take care of every piece of artwork in the island. And we established the first coalition of saving the patrimony of Puerto Rico, that the Museo is a leading museum institution that we have done it. So I want to thank also the Smithsonian, as I mentioned. I want to thank the Mellon Foundation that also give us support during this period that without them we couldn't make it. Also the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. Thank you, the diaspora, and thank you all you colleagues that helped me during this hard period, and to the staff, and in the name of the board, thank you very much. Thank you, Laura. You're a great leader.
Congratulations again, Marta. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., we will present this year's awards for diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. I hope to see you all back here. But now, I am thrilled to pass the mic over to my fellow AAM board member, Dr. Lisa Yun Lee, to facilitate this morning's panel. Lisa is a cultural activist and the executive director of the National Public Housing Museum in Chicago. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Lee and our keynote speakers, Carol Bebelle, Rick Lowe, and Mitch Landrieu.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. Today's plenary features 3 extraordinary individuals who have reinvented community revitalization as an art form. They have moved mountains and monuments to create social change, challenged mainstream narratives, reclaimed painful histories, and also created new ways to celebrate with collective joy. Rick Lowe, directly to my left, has said, "The only standard for judging socially engaged art should be how much justice it creates in the world." Long before creative placemaking became a buzzword, Rick founded Project Row Houses in Houston's historic 3rd Ward. With the collaboration of fellow artists and community members, Project Row Houses transformed 2 blocks into a visionary place to make art a community support center and historic preservation initiative. Rick was awarded a MacArthur Genius Prize in 2014 and was recently announced that the city of Tulsa will receive a $1 million prize from the Bloomberg Philanthropies for a public art project that will be led by Rick that will celebrate and commemorate a vibrant community in the historic Greenwood district known as Black Wall Street. Carol Bebelle, the co-founder of Ashe Cultural Arts Center in Central City, New Orleans, with Douglas Redd 20 years ago this year. Carol embodies Ashe and has been a pivotal force leading the revitalization and transformation of Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard and a resurgence of an entire historic neighborhood into an African and Caribbean cultural corridor. A magical part of this city that is now home to the Hope Credit Union, Cafe Reconcile, the New Orleans Jazz Market, the Southern Food and Beverage Museum, the Dratty's Public Market, and other small businesses and cultural entities. Carol is also a magnificent poet and one of the loveliest people in the world, who also happened to introduce me to my husband. There is a difference between remembrance of history and reverence of it, said the mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, in his now famous speech in May of 2017. As Landrieu said those words, city workers a few blocks away uprooted an enormous statue of Robert E. Lee, the last of 4 Confederate monuments that were removed after a years-long process. Woo! I think that deserves a little clapping. In addition to serving as mayor from 2008 to 2018, he is also the author of a breathtaking book, In the Shadows of Statues, A White Southerner Confronts History, and he also served as lieutenant governor of Louisiana. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really happy to have you here. Each of you is a fierce warrior for justice who has deployed arts and culture in really unique ways. Mitch, I want to turn it to you first to kick it off. We would love to hear you talk about the removal of the Confederate statues and your work to make the cultural landscape of NOLA more equitable. Thanks.
Thank you. First of all, welcome to New Orleans. It's amazing y'all are here this early in the morning. We're a 24/7 town, so first of all, it's great to be with all of you. Thank you so much for allowing me to spend a little time in your presence, and I'm thrilled to be with these two unbelievable people who are tremendous leaders in the United States of America. I want to make a couple of brief comments and then get specifically to New Orleans. But as a general rule, our country is struggling mightily with a very simple notion that diversity is a strength, not a weakness. And that idea is being tested again in a full frontal and an aggressive way. And the people in this room have to beat that back. Now, I'm preaching to the choir, but I hope that you can look around this room and take a minute to breathe in your importance in the national discussion on diversity, on equity, and inclusion. I know that y'all are going to give an award about this tomorrow, but hopefully this just doesn't become another thing, but it becomes the thing. Art and music, history, architecture, museums, they are the glue that holds the country together if they are done appropriately and curated the right way. If the boards reflect what the country looks like today and what's going to look like in 2040, and we need to get about it and not get dragged to it, because diversity is a massive strength, not a weakness. And on top of that, what you display in the properties that you have, what you curate, is supposed to be a reflection of the heart and soul of what's coming out of the creative juices and talents of the artists that are producing them. And to the extent that your organization doesn't do that, you might consider the fact that you would lean into that rather than away from it. It's not just about, although it is important to be about justice and reflection and what the truth is, but it's also, as Carol so ably demonstrated with Ashe, economic development, restoring economic opportunity to neighborhoods that had gotten left behind, primarily because of race. As lieutenant governor and as the mayor of the city of New Orleans, I was blessed to have grown up in the field of art. And I just learned from a very early age that it was the marrow that held everything together. And that if you wanted to know the truth, you had to ask the artist, you had to ask the poet, you had to ask the visual artist, you had to ask the people that produce the things that you curate in the spaces that you have. And it's supposed to reflect what the soul of the nation is. And if it doesn't adequately reflect it, then in a sense, we're hiding it. And so that's what the monuments were about. As we were rebuilding the city, remember, we had Katrina, Rita, Ike, Gustav, the national recession, the BP oil spill, which is why our heart breaks for our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico. Many of us have been there to help, and every time somebody else hurts, the people from New Orleans go, because the people of America saved us. We know what it feels like. But as we began to rebuild the city, we had to confront, well, what are we going to put back? Are we going to put it back the way it was the night before the storm hit? Are we going to look at ourselves and say, you know, we could have done a better job? We could have course corrected. We could have changed some things that got the way they are in a way that they should never have been. And the monuments happen to be one of those things that there were physical things occupying spaces trying to reflect our history when in fact they didn't reflect our history at all. And to the extent that they did, they only told a very small part of our history, 4 years, and then from one perspective. And so when people who were not in favor of me taking the monuments down said that I was trying to destroy history, I actually reminded them something that Ken Burns and Wynton Marsalis and Walter Isaacson and lots of other people said, no, actually what we're doing is we're opening up the landscape so all of our history can be told, because people can use excuses to strangle other folks and to keep them away. This is a very vibrant nation. Out of many, we are one, e pluribus unum. It's one of our national mottos. That's not how we act all the time. And my kind of mission at the moment is to try to open up people's eyes whose eyes are closed, to have them hear things that have been spoken but they can't hear, to see things that they just won't see, and ask them that if our job is to tell history, then we ought to tell the whole history. And there's much more beauty in the totality of who we are, where we came from, how we got here, than just a very narrow vision. And I believe that it's the mission of the people in this room to help tell this story through the difficult challenges that I know that you continue to have every day.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Mitch. Rick, I want to turn to you because you have actually uncovered a really extraordinary history that has been untold, and I want you to talk a little bit about your new project, the Black Wall Street Project.
Great. Before I talk about that, let me just say that, my career has been kind of defined by this relationship, by the relationship between community and museums, or art world, but a lot of museums played a role in that. And so I've been fortunate to be able to work on projects that were initiated from the grassroots community level, and also from that have been initiated through museum institutions. And this current project that Lisa's referencing is is a project that has both of those for me, which is really exciting. The city of Tulsa, many people don't know this history, but apparently the city of Tulsa had one of the worst race massacres in the country back in 1921. The Greenwood neighborhood was referenced by people as Black Wall Street because it was one of the wealthiest black neighborhoods in the country. And in 1921, it was completely destroyed by an angry mob of white citizens. And this neighborhood was about 35 blocks, over 11,000 people living there. The entire neighborhood was burned, hundreds of people were killed. And so they're having the centennial for that in 2021. And I was asked if I would help them think about how to commemorate that. And as Lisa said, we managed to get a $1 million Bloomberg Award to support us in this effort, which has been really good. And but one of the things that was interesting about this whole situation was that the history we always, the little history that people do know about the Greenwood incident, they know about the disaster, they know about the tragedy. But what people don't know is that after 1920, the disaster in 1921, the black people that experienced it came back and they rebuilt completely and rebuilt the neighborhood better and stronger. And so while I was a little bit hesitant about this project because I didn't want to go into the suffering of African Americans and to relive that story, I was very attracted to this idea of how they rebuilt. As we're having trouble with black neighborhoods in the 21st century like never before, it just caused me to pause and think, how did they do that? I mean, how did they come together to rebuild? And so I left with the question of what would Black Wall Street look like in the 21st century, which then led me to an opportunity that connected me to the Smart Museum in Chicago, in which I'm exploring this in two ways. So in Tulsa, we're looking at the history, the historical context, but we're also looking at, in Chicago, one of the signature African-American economic centers, to think about it as a way of helping us understand what Black Wall Street might look like in the 21st century. Now, with that said, I had my own ideas about that going into this project, and it seemed pretty simple from the romantic notion of what, of how people think about African-American communities doing segregation, that they were there was this kind of collective economics that was happening, and there was this social cohesion and all that stuff that kept the community vibrant, and even in the context of segregation. So the initial thinking among a lot of African Americans is that, you hear the slogans, buy black or support black businesses and all these kinds of things, basically trying to harken back to the days when the wealthiest lived among the poorest and they all supported each other. And but I had to come to a rude awakening that actually that's a dream, because it wasn't really that way. I mean, the reason that those communities worked that way because they were forced to. So when people had the freedom to go out, they went out and they moved along. So it brings forth a question that actually I had this question with Lisa about the whole notion of black capitalism and how it works and how will it work in the 21st century. Would it be something that could actually help sustain those who are not so well off in the community, or does it just become another form of exploitation? So it's a very complicated project that we've kind of embarked upon. But the exciting thing about it to me is that it really is a reflection of what's happening in the museum world, in the country at large, is trying to figure out how do we share the wealth? How do we share the wealth, whether it's, wealthy African Americans with the lower income African American community, or whether it's, big museums in the context of communities. So that's the question, I think, of the 21st century is, we have to figure out how do we share the wealth?
Thanks, Rick. Carol, I want you to jump in now because these are questions I know that you grapple with also every day as you contribute to the renaissance of that area in NOLA, which is so identified now with a sort of economic sort of resurgence and sort of what comes next. And so can you talk a little bit about your work and what you're grappling with?
Yeah. I'm trying to think about where to kind of drop into this. I think I'm going to start the conversation at culture. I think that America finds itself kind of moving away from a place that is no more into a time that is not yet. And we're caught in a shift. And the need to establish, to create, to emerge a culture that supports social justice is what's critical. We've had 50 years of changing laws and policies and leaders to try to create it, and here we find ourselves 50 years later with even more people having to clamor for their rights. And part of it is that we have not seeded the culture, the values that go along with the aspiration of our founding documents. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Who must and where must you be to be in the place to be pursuing just your happiness? We the people, how are we? You know, are we making us more of a we? And I think that that is where Ashe stepped into the conversation. Is like, how can we be a force for we-making? How can we help people to complete and correct narratives that they have in their heads, in their DNA sometimes, about others? How are we able to manage to essentially grow compassion, to remove the armor that allows us to be less than concerned about the welfare of others? And so that is the mission we take on in these words when we say that we use culture and art as our tools for human, community, and economic development. And in a way, that's what we attempted to take on the Boulevard, which under then Lieutenant Governor Landrieu, we were able to make a cultural corridor. And so we widened the strip, and we live in a community where we've claimed a theme for the community, which is culture, community, and commerce. And we also have a manifesto, because we understood that those words alone gave you an idea of what we were reaching out at, but there needed to be a vision of what would a community look like if social justice was supreme. And the manifesto gives us that. So we want diversity. We want people to be able to have not just first chances, but second chances. We're a second chance employer. And so if somebody's made a mistake, they don't all of a sudden drop off the planet and aren't entitled anymore to an opportunity anymore. So, so that's kind of what we're trying to lift up. And we've gone from being a blighted community with all the horrible statistics to having been a national model of how you do a cultural Main Street. And yet we still struggle, because now this was a bad community that people who we didn't care about lived in. And now it's a community that's got stuff going for it, so everybody wants to live in it. And so now we're trying to be strategic in how it is that we influence people to come and become a part of our we, and not come and try to displace us. And so it's an ongoing effort, and it's one that I think is at work across the country, and that the notion of being able to do better in this time of a clamor for rights for so many, from women, Muslims, Native Americans, African Americans, the list is getting longer and longer, that we really have to be concerned about this basic piece of having values, having a culture that supports inclusion, that respects difference, that understands the enrichment that comes to your life because you have different people in it, and not everyone being and looking the same way.
I love the way that all three of you have really used and challenged arts and culture to not just say that we should all have access to beauty, but that we all have the right to determine what is beautiful for ourselves, for our communities, and really challenge white supremacy in this way, and the sort of stranglehold that it's had on sort of the definition of our landscape. You know, because this is a museum conference, I'm just gonna dive in and ask, museums have not always been the sites of radical democracy. In many instances have actually been part of the institutionalized and systemic forms of racism in power. I want to ask you, like, what is the real potential of museums in this times? What are some things that are definite challenges, and how have you worked with museums and without museums to sort of move your agenda?
Any one of us?
Anyone.
Yeah, I think that, again, hearkening from the comments that I made previously, what we've chosen to do is we started in the tricentennial year. Last year was the 300th anniversary of our city's beginning, and we started doing these installations on diasporic countries. And so we've converted our space into Ghana, the Congo, we just did Morocco, and we're going to do Benin this year. And this, all of this is in an effort to be able to essentially, first of all, give people who might never get an opportunity to visit these places an opportunity to have a sensual experience with other people for a few reasons. One, to discover their differences, but importantly, to discover the similarities that they have to us. Annually we do the Maafa, which is an opportunity. The Maafa is a Kiswahili word that means great tragedy. We found ourselves grappling a little bit with talking about the Black Holocaust, because the Holocaust is really a word for the Jewish community. And so what we do then is that we remember the people who came before us, who made it possible for us to be here. And at the same time, we talk about the past that we're inheriting, but we talk about the future that we're creating. And that's the other thing that I think that museums could help with. One is being able to make our differences less oddity and more about familiarity. And then the other thing is about helping to unpack hierarchy, to complete and correct the narrative. When you look at small pieces of the story, you can come up with some really strange interpretations. This is definitely the lion story. Until the lion tells his story, the joy of the hunt will always celebrate the hunter. And so being able to have people understand all of the various and sundry things that are at work inside of a story. And all of this is about essentially making full and complete everybody who's sitting at the welcome table. And being certain that they can get there.
Yeah, Rick.
Yeah, well, I'll just call up Mitch's comment about diversity. That is the thing that's kind of driving us now. We all see a value in that. And I think, to me, one of the things that I've been trying to do in my career in relation to cultural institutions and community is trying to get across the idea that diversity is not just something that's inward, but it's also something that's outward. Because most times when people think of diversity, they're thinking about how they can diversify things within their own institution environment. But part of that diversity is how do you go out, And so my work has been really about trying to figure out ways to help push those institutions out. Because once they go out, then the networks that they interact with outside of their own institutions, it grows them, but it also becomes beneficial for those folks that are outside of the institution to be able to expand their networks.
So I'm starting to giggle because I'm about to take y'all on an around the trip, and I remember my around the world trip, and my wife always says, you got to land the plane, get to the point. So let me see if I can do this in a short period of time from outside in. Luther Vandross. It is a good start. And for y'all if y'all don't know Luther, get to know Luther. One of Luther's most beautiful songs is "A House Is Not a Home." We learned this during Katrina when we lost 500,000 homes were hurt, 250,000 were destroyed. Everything here was gone. Folks in Puerto Rico know this. And what you learn immediately was it wasn't the building. Like the church wasn't the building. You didn't need the physical structure to have the soul of the church. You could have church in a tent, and you didn't even have to do it on the property where the church was, as long as the soul of the people were there. And in that idea, when I was lieutenant governor, the lieutenant governor here oversees the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism. So they're not without some portfolio, but they're not the governor. They don't have the whole portfolio. So like when you don't have a lot of stuff and you want some more stuff, you got to go find friends. And if you can't, find a way, you have to make one. And so we were talking, Carol and I, a lot of other people, about a civil rights museum. At the time, Atlanta was thinking about building one. They were starting to incubate the beautiful facility in Washington, D.C. And I remember very distinctly one night I was in St. John the Baptist Parish, which is a parish on a river. Y'all have counties, we have parishes. It's the same thing. And an old white lady said to me when I was perplexed about, building stuff and not have enough money to build a building, she said to me, son, she says, the whole state is a museum. Think of the whole physicality of the state being a museum. And my mind opened up to the possibility of, instead of building a building, why didn't we go back and historically go find all the neighborhoods where African Americans were, operated, suffered tragedy and or triumph, and create a trail and just remind people what the history of the state is, because the whole physical space was a museum. That opened my mind to a new way. As a lieutenant governor, we oversee the state museum system. So we have, for some strange reason in this state, two separate museum systems, one that the Secretary of State runs and one that the lieutenant governor runs. And if you go downtown in the French Quarter, there's a Cabildo and the Presbytere, which generally is shut off, or had been historically, from the public, at least in the way it presented itself. They're open and people go, but they never really tried hard to get everybody to come in. And there was this little group called Roots of Music. Now, this was a little group of folks that some guys that played in Rebirth Jazz Band decided to curate, because here we teach kids through music the values of life. And they started with a couple of kids, and now they're up to about 400. And they needed a place to practice. And because I was a lieutenant governor, I said, you know where you're going to practice? You're going to practice at the Cabildo, downtown, in the back of that really nice museum. And these young kids of color were like, can we really go in there? I'm like, hell yeah, that's yours. That's your space. Had that same experience with the book fair at the Latta Library. We had kids that had never been in our big, beautiful, ornate libraries because nobody opened up and said, can you come in? And I would just offer a couple of just very comments that you might already know. Whether you're using the physical building that you have, or your ability to convene, your ability to take in, like you talked about, or your ability to go out, it seems to me that we're trying to do some very important but very simple things. Open up people's minds, touch their souls, and as a consequence, change their hearts. Because Carol really got to, because she always does, and she's a genius and spectacular, in this country, we are the way we are because we designed it this way. It is, in fact, designed to be what it is today. And so when you're talking to your friends about institutional racism and you go, I don't know what that really is, well, what it means is redlining, and a consequence of that. The story that you tell about Tulsa, if you guys go back and Google that story, it kind of calls it a black uprising, but it was not. Talking about the hunter and the hunter, the people who told that story in a lie to make you think that the African Americans in Tulsa back in the 1920s did something wrong, when in fact it was an attack. And how you tell the story, especially making sure that it's accurate and honest, has a lot to do with how we're going to reflect. And I'll leave you just with this kind of simple notion. The people that write history, they have a special obligation to get it right and tell the whole story, and we've done a terrible job of that in the country. And you are the protectors of the real story. And if you go back, it's not a, thank you for that. This is not I'm not intending at the moment for this to be an indictment. I am intending it to be an observation which I believe to be true. And I challenge all of you to go back and look at the histories and the stories that we have always told that people never really bothered to find the whole truth to. It's one of the reasons why when we take oaths, I don't know if you've thought about this much, but when you take an oath, they ask you to tell the truth. I mean, our parents tell us to do that. Evidently, it's not that important anymore in America, but I would commend that for rethinking. to tell the truth, but then they say tell the whole truth. And then they say tell nothing but the truth. Now, that rolls off of our tongues like it doesn't mean anything, but if you think about it for a minute, you can actually tell a half a truth, which means that you told half a lie. And you can tell the truth, and then you can tell something other than the truth, and they still won't get the whole story. So the issue is that we have to really check ourselves, and we have to make sure that we work hard, because it doesn't come to us naturally, to be inclusive rather than exclusive, to inhale and exhale rather than just to push our hands away. And if the facility that you're running is just the physical space, and what's going on in that space is not reflective, really, of what's happening in the country, whose mind are you opening? Whose soul are you touching, and whose heart are you changing? Because at the end of the day, the difference between de jure segregation and isolation and de facto, the laws can be whatever they're going to be. But Carol hit this exactly right. If you're not planting the seeds, if you're not tilling the soil, if you're not watering the plant, if you're not changing the hearts and the minds, no matter what the political structure is, no matter what the institutional structure is, you're not going to get to where our founding fathers really asked us to be. We know that we're never going to hit that more perfect union, but our aspiration should be that we're going to continue to trend in that direction. And one of the real challenges that we have to push back on is the very notion of making a more perfect union, of going forward rather than being backward, is being challenged. And I would just recommend to you again, you guys are on the front lines of telling the real story, the whole story, the true story, and one that will actually take us to a place that we haven't been before. And I would encourage you to look within, look at your board, look at what you're curating, look at your connectivity to the neighborhoods where you are, look at how you facilitate with all of the other organizations that are in and around your area, and be purposeful and thoughtful about what it is that you program going forward, because at the end of the day, a house is not a home.
Thanks,
it's only going to be part of the soul of what's inside of it.
Let me ask you, this is a conference. Yeah, thank you. This is also a conference about sustainability, and recently people like Greta Thunberg and other people have sort of made it a point to say all the work that you're doing won't make a difference because 20 years from now it's an existential crisis and we're not even going to be here. So I'm wondering, sort of how are you addressing climate change and other sort of environmental issues in your own work? Rick, maybe can you start?
Well, when I saw that question, I thought that's a big responsibility for museums to think about, climate change. But I like to think of it more in kind of local terms, in terms of how are we dealing in society in an equitable way, in which will actually give us a better platform to actually start thinking about these broader issues of climate change, because so much there's so much about how institutions are funded, where those funds are coming from, how those funds are impacting climate change, and there's and how little support is actually going to these devastated communities in terms of how they can actually sustain themselves to actually participate in the conversation of climate change.
Yeah. Carol.
Yeah, sure. Again, we're a community-based cultural arts center, so it begins with being certain that people understand the threat. We have more than our fair share of folks who live at and below the poverty level, and for them, having shelter and food and clothing and knowing that they're going to be able to be taken care of really kind of occupies their time and attention. And so being able to have people to appreciate that living in the present and the future that is a millisecond away from it is something that we have to do more of. So we teach. And then the whole notion of really practicing kind of an entrepreneurial approach to what it is that we do. So cultural entrepreneurship. So finding ways to insinuate ourselves into things that might not ordinarily invite us to. And one of the things that we've been working on, and in fact are working toward right now, is essentially gathering all of the scholars and the data folks together and to have them do a briefing for artists, culture bearers, and creatives, because often that is done for press conferences and for their peers. And you know, the limelight on the news is very short. A song lasts a long time, a poem, a theater piece, etc. And so we're trying to essentially bring more artists to being able to hear and know what some of the more compelling data is around the environment, but also other instances. Here in New Orleans, here in Louisiana, the issues around incarceration, mental health. Denise Sherrington is essentially my shero right now as she's talking about mental health and its impact on people who are low poverty and people of color. And so the issue of sustainability is not just whether the earth will be here, it's really whether the people will be able to essentially be more and more reclaiming their humanity here as we go on as well.
Ashe.
Couple of, as always, I completely agree with Carol. On the issue of resilience and sustainability, let's talk about financial first. So when I was lieutenant governor, we struggled with the issue of how to fund art and music. I remember when I was running for state legislature, somebody asked me, well, if you had to choose between paying a firefighter and paying an artist, what would you do? Get that question all the time when you're running for office. And I said, it's an unfair question, and we should do both. And you have to find a way through either direct payments for the arts, although which this country is generally bad at. We do much worse per capita than other countries. Or you try to create some kind of tax incentives, which is, Carol would kind of spurred us to do what we call cultural products district, where we went to the state and said, you know, in Louisiana, there are 144,000 people that work in the arts. And when you add up what we pay back in taxes, we actually have a 16-to-1 return on investment. So when you give the oil and gas industry or the tourism industry or anything else a tax incentive, why can't we go to the table and think about it, as Carol said, in terms of, you know, cultural warriors, where we say we have a right to be at the budget table. And we have an argument to be made about how many jobs we provide and what it is, what value we bring. So I would not throw that away, because financial resiliency is important. Also, philanthropy is important. And then finally, wholesale and retail protection from the environmental concerns that you have coming your way. The retail piece is you're physically someplace. You ought to know where that is, and you ought to be engaged in whether or not your community is actually beginning to think about how to protect yourself from the kinds of environmental things that are coming your way. And then the wholesale piece is critically important, especially for indigenous and poor populations. General Honore, who was one of the generals that came down and helped rescue us, said it simply and better than anybody else. He said, look, when it gets hot, the poor get hotter. And when it gets cold, the poor get colder. And that is continually true. There's a young woman here, I can't see her, Monique, who is a member of the Homa Nation. They live south of us. And they're about to get, actually, it's the first time the federal government has paid money to actually relocate indigenous people. Now, they're not moving that far. And by the way, in 15 to 20 years, the water is going to be high there as well. But it is to just continue to point out that as climate change continues to encroach, and it's coming faster than people are expecting it to, the water in Louisiana, the water is going to get higher, the marshes are going to get lower, and the storms are going to get more plentiful. It's going to hurt people who are poor much quicker than it's going to hurt people who are wealthy. And the people that don't have money, that haven't been able to build generational wealth, are going to have a much harder time recovering, because they're going to lose the little bit that they had. And we have to pay attention to it, get ahead of it. And we're not doing particularly well, because we always want to kind of put off for another day the bad stuff that we see coming. And I just think denial is not a great strategy in the climate change conversation at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking about the environmental justice issues. We have to actually wrap up. I'm so sorry, our time here is so short with one another, but I did want to kick it off to let each of you, sort of share one last thing. I wanted to maybe also ask if you could share one thing we should see, eat, or read in this town that otherwise we might not know about. So let's just start with Carol, and then we'll go to Rick, and then Mitch to end.
Yeah, I want to really issue a little bit of a challenge. One of the things in terms of the conversation on sustainability, There are lots of things going on in a community. I mean, there's education going on in the community, there's work on infrastructure, there's all kinds of things. So when we think about the notion of sustainability for our institutions, for artists, for culture bearers, we need to be sitting at those tables and being a part of the conversations that are going on, because sometimes there are places where we can manage to be seen as a resource and can be invested in that way. I find often that myself and maybe a couple of other folks are the only ones in the rooms when they are dry and very boring meetings often, but there are places where key decisions are being made about what neighborhoods are gonna look like, what things are gonna get built, what's gonna happen, and there are millions of dollars that are being invested in that. And so I really challenge us to understand that we belong there too, and not just with each other. We belong in our community and at the tables where the decisions about our community are being made. And so I encourage us to do more and better than we've been doing in that regard.
Thanks, Carol. What's one thing that we should see that we might not otherwise
The Ashe
think
Cultural
about?
Arts Center, please.
Of course,
Come and see the
Ashe, head
Cultural Arts
over
Center.
there. It's amazing.
1712 Arrest
Yeah.
Castle, Haley Boulevard.
Rick Lowe, what are you reading? What are you listening to?
Yeah, well, I'm not from New Orleans, so I don't know very much about New Orleans, but I will throw this out, though. About 25 years ago, when I first started getting familiar with New Orleans, I bumped into this book that at that time was very meaningful for me, and maybe Mitch can talk about it. He might know more about this, but a defining book for me about New Orleans is Confederacy of Dunces, which is a great, great read. And outside of that, though, in my own work, I'm reading all this stuff about Black Wall Street, about the color of money, the wealth gap between blacks and whites. Mary Jane Jacobs' new book, Dewey for Artists, amazing book. And yeah, so that's...
Okay. Thanks. And what about you, Mitch?
It unfortunately was a Confederacy of Dunces. I keep hoping that we've gotten better. First of all, don't miss Ashe. It's beautiful. It's right down the street. World War II Museum, the New Orleans Museum of Art. We have great cultural institutions in this city. The answer to what you should eat is everything. You don't really get a chance to be diet-free wherever you guys are going. Just don't even think about that in the city of New Orleans. It's a great place, and if you haven't felt it already, if you love New Orleans, she's gonna love you right back, and it's a great place, and I'm thrilled that all of you came, so God bless you, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your work and fearless, courageous efforts in talking about racism, of challenging the perils of capitalism, and working for justice. I really appreciate it. Join me again in thanking these three extraordinary individuals: Mitch Landrieu, Carol Bebelle, and Rick Lowe.
Please welcome back to the stage Kippen Dialbachu, Susan Taylor, and Stephen Watson.
Oh, they're doing a second. Thank you so much. I know, they kept flashing.
I'm in Chicago.
All right, folks. As our mayor said, this is a 24/7 town. And Kippen, I think in New Orleans, we like to parade just about anywhere and any time. And I think it would be a great idea to lead everyone down to the expo with the second line. So with our friends at the Kinfolks Brass Band, please come on up and we'll get this thing started.